Whispers from Below, a horror podcast by Justin W. Geis. Scary stories, both real and fake. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of Whispers from Below, a podcast by a madman for madmen. I'm your resident psychopath, Justin W. Geis, and today's topic of discussion is Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, before I get into the actual podcast episode and all of that, yes, I am starting Season 2. Very exciting stuff. I know I kind of dropped off the face of the earth for 2 weeks. I had a deviated septum and had to get that fixed surgically. So I was kind of out of commission for 2 weeks. I couldn't really talk. I couldn't really blow my nose. I couldn't smell anything. I could barely taste anything. It was a really rough time. A lot of pain, a lot of blood. Really gross, nasty stuff. But on the bright side, I'm feeling so much better now. And I feel like I can finally start doing episodes again. So for those of you that don't know, I have a new quarantine schedule. So I'm going to be uploading a bonus episode on Thursday. So I'm going to be doing one episode on Monday and one episode on Thursday. Those are going to be uploaded at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. So keep an eye out for all of those. I did get in while I was all injured and broken and stuff like that. I did get in some merch, some new clothing ideas. So keep an eye out for pictures of some of those. I have a sweatshirt and a t-shirt. So keep your eye out because you might see some really cool pictures of stuff. If you guys are interested in purchasing any of that, please let me know. And without further ado, let us talk about the episode itself. This is going to be a relatively dark episode. There is quite a lot of gore, quite a lot of sexual violence, and things like that. So I really want to make sure that for my younger listeners, this is definitely not an episode for you to listen to. Please come back next week. I will most likely have something for you then, or check in on Thursday. For those of you that are sensitive about topics such as like murder and cannibalism and things like that, this might not be the episode for you. This is a really dark story. It's really unfortunate what happened to these people. So I just want everybody to be aware that this is super dark, super terrible. Let's get into it. So, Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Shout out to Milwaukee. I lived there for about a year and a half, and I really liked it there. It was a pretty cool city. I think I would have had more fun in it if I was 21 at the time. There's a lot of bars and a lot of stuff you can do when you're older, but it was a nice city. Also home to a lot of serial killers, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. And fun fact, Dahmer is mostly of German and Norwegian heritage, which is the same as me. So look, I'm not saying that I am also a gay serial killer, but I don't know. Seems like an uncanny connection to me. Dahmer claims that he was super deprived of attention as an infant, but a lot of other sources, including like his parents and neighbors and stuff, say that he was actually like doted upon and was like this prized possession of his parents when he was a toddler, until his mother ended up getting sick. She started to become super aggressive and argued with everybody, including neighbors and her husband. She became addicted to Equinil pills. Equinil is used to help with anxiety and things like that. She actually tried to commit suicide by overdosing on these pills when Dahmer was like in elementary school. So he was like very young to see his mother in that state. He was described as being like an extremely energetic and happy child until he had a double hernia surgery when he was 4 years old. He was like almost 4. He was like a month away. From that point forward was when his mom got sick and he started to become neglected due to his mother's illness, and he sort of became like more of a timid, very quiet, introverted child. His Dahmer's first grade teacher actually wrote on his report card that she felt that he was neglected due to his mother's illness and that something should be done to fix this. And of course, nothing was done to fix this. He always had a very strange interest in dead animals, and like friends of his and neighbors and even his family have recounted that he would like dismember like dead animals. Like if he found a dead animal on the side of the road, he would like pick it up and he would dismember it and try to figure out like how it was put together. He would keep parts of them in jars. He was always collecting bugs and keeping them in jars until they died. Just a very not so kosher childhood. He actually at one point said that he was curious about how each animal, quote, fitted together, unquote, which is something that like is a very childlike curiosity, but to literally dismember a dead body when you're that young, like that's a little scarring. Um, he actually once, his dad recounted that he once decapitated a dog that was already dead, just so we're clear, not alive. He nailed the body to a tree in the woods before impaling the skull of the dog behind the house. And apparently, this all stems from this weird instance where his father was digging underneath the house and found some animal bones underneath it. Dahmer was instantly fascinated with the sounds that they made. And from that point forward, he was obsessed with bones and where they were placed inside of the animals. So it was like the sounds of the bones like clinking together that apparently like striked his fancy. And from that point forward, he had this weird, like, almost like sexual interest in dead things. A younger brother was born in 1966, and they actually let Dahmer name the kid, and he named him David. They moved to Ohio. They moved around there for many, many years, which, as you know, if you're a kid and you're constantly moving around and you're already introverted and shy, it can take a really big toll on your social life. So that probably had a lot to do with his sort of solitary lifestyle. Dahmer once asked his father, who was a chemist, how to properly bleach bones in order to preserve them. His father was really excited at this prospect because he thought that it was a scientific curiosity. So he taught him how to bleach and preserve bones, which you'll see later Dahmer uses very frequently in his adult lifestyle, probably not in the way that his father intended. He continued collecting animal bones, and he started drinking pretty much at all times of the day at around 14. People at school would ask him, "Why are you drinking gin? Like, we're in school. Also, you're like 14." And he said, quote, "It's my medicine," unquote. So he was even drinking in school, pretty much drinking at all times of the day. So his alcohol abuse started like at a very young age. He was originally like a really quiet and like really intelligent kid. Like he didn't really speak up much in class, but he always got good grades. He always like, worked hard. And then once he started to get more into alcohol, he dropped his grades and sort of became like a class clown. He still wasn't like super popular, but he would pull all these pranks in school to kind of like make himself a little bit more popular, if that makes any sense. We all know that kid that would like do dumb shit in school just to get everybody to laugh. That was kind of his role. His parents ended up getting a divorce in 1977, but they did try to do a lot of marriage counseling, and it was ultimately unsuccessful. This all happened when Dahmer was turning 18, so he became a legal adult, meaning that when his mother gained custody of the kids, she did not gain custody of Dahmer. She only got custody of his younger brother, so she took him and moved away, and his father also moved out. So Dahmer was alone in the family home. And this was when Dahmer killed his first victim. So he ended up picking up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was headed to a rock concert nearby. After drinking for a little while, Hicks said that he wanted to go. He wanted to go to the concert, and Dahmer really did not want him to go. So he ended up bludgeoning him twice in the back of the head with a 10-pound dumbbell, knocking him unconscious. Then he strangled him with the handle of the dumbbell and stripped him down before masturbating over his naked, dead body. So, remember when I said that this was a dark episode? that's not even one of the worst things that he did. So welcome to the life of Jeffrey Dahmer. It's a lot to take in. I spent maybe 3 hours researching this, and afterwards I was like, I feel dirty. I feel gross for talking about this person, but it's so interesting that I have to. So this is where you start to see that he has that weird necrophilic, is that a word? Because necrophilia, but is that, anyway, I'm gonna say it as though it's a word, and you're all gonna trust me that it's a word. Yeah, necrophilic tendencies towards this sort of dead human that he was really attracted to. He ended up burying him in the backyard, and then a couple weeks later was like, that's dumb. So he decided to dig up the body, pare the flesh from the bone, and dissolve the flesh in an acid solution so that he could flush that down the toilet. Then he broke down the bones with a sledgehammer. He pulverized them so that he could scatter those in the woods so that nobody would ever find the body. His dad was like, you got to go to college, you got to do something with your life. So he attempted to go to school at Ohio State University, but he only ended up staying for one term, and he failed out of it because of his alcohol abuse. His dad had paid for the second term, but Dahmer was like, why am I staying here? So he left. He ended up enrolling in the United States Army as a medical specialist. His father kind of pushed him towards that option because he was like, again, you need to do something with your life. And he ended up being stationed in West Germany, where he ended up raping 2 people that were in the army with him. The alcohol abuse eventually led to Dahmer being honorably discharged because his work started to deteriorate. And he decided that he wanted to go live in a sunny place, so he tried to live in Miami, but again, his alcohol abuse led to his decline, and he eventually had to move back to Ohio with his father. This is when he got his first arrest. He was arrested for drunken disorderly conduct and was sentenced to a $60 fine and a 10-day jail stay. His father recommended that he wean off of the alcohol. He tried to, limit the amount of alcohol that Dahmer was drinking. Obviously, this was unsuccessful. And then he ended up sending him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin in December of 1981 after his stepmother prompted his father to kick him out of the house, basically. She was like, he's got to go. And he was like, I know. And so they kicked him out. When he was living with his grandmother, though, he was actively seeking work. He got arrested again for indecent exposure. He basically stripped down and showed his dick to a group of women and children, and got arrested for it, obviously. He ended up being on parole, and he remained unemployed for 2 years. He began work at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, and this is when he started to frequent gay bars and bathhouses. He recounts this story where he was in a public library, and this man handed a note to him that was like, hey, can I suck your dick? And Dahmer was like, oh my god. And he started to have these weird urges to dominate and control someone, and he was like, yeah, I'm gonna be gay. So he sort of figured out his sexuality and also his kink, what he was into. So he started to go to gay bars and the bathhouses. And for those of you that don't know, if you're not a part of the gay community, basically bathhouses are these not even hotels. It's there are rooms with beds, but it's also a gym, but it's also a sauna thing. It's weird, but it's a place to fuck. It's basically just a place for gay people to have sex and then leave. That's its purpose, basically. So he began to sort of frequent these places and started having sex with all these men. He ended up stealing a male mannequin at one point that he used a lot for sexual stimulation when he was trying to not go to the bathhouses as frequently, but his grandmother found it in a closet and obviously made him throw it away. But he states that he was super frustrated with the fact that his partners would move during sex, so he ended up drugging them with sleep pills in order to keep them still, so they were completely still when he was fucking them. He said, quote, I trained myself to view people as objects of pleasure instead of as people, unquote, which is a very horrifying statement. Like, to literally be like, I trained myself to see people as not people. Like, who does that? That's just so, like, that is so out of left field to be like, yeah, well, I didn't want to see them as people. Like, normally people have to work towards seeing them as people, not the other way around. You know what I mean? Very strange. After 12 of these drug-induced rapes happened in the bathhouse, they ended up revoking his membership and he was not allowed to return, so he started using like motels and hotel rooms to do the same thing. He ended up masturbating in front of 2 teenage boys. They were both 12 years old. But he ended up originally claiming, like, taking control of what he did, realizing that it was going to get him a larger sentence. He ended up later claiming that he was simply urinating and didn't know that anybody was looking. He got charged with disorderly conduct and a 1-year probation. And then on November 20th, 1987, Dahmer met a 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi at a bar. He ended up convincing him to return to the Ambassador Hotel with him, where all he intended to do, supposedly, was to drug and rape him like he had done in the past. He woke up the next morning to find that Tuomi was beneath him in the bed. His chest was bloody and bruised, along with Dahmer's fists and forearms being completely bruised. His chest was completely smashed in. The bed was covered in blood. So was Tuomi, and so was Dahmer. He claims that he has no recollection of this murder. He has no idea how it happened. He doesn't know what happened. All he knows is that he just wanted to drug and rape him and then ended up killing him, but he blacks out. He claims that he has no idea what happened. He woke up all of a sudden and he was dead. That's all he knows. So he ended up using a super large suitcase to sort of stuff the body in, and then he transported the body to his grandmother's house. After waiting about 1 week, he ended up dismembering the body, including filleting all of the flesh and pulverizing the bones as he had done before. He discarded the body in the trash, but he kept the head. So this is where you start to see him like keeping trophies of sorts. He kept the head of Stephen, and he ended up boiling the head in a Soilex and bleach solution to try and keep the skull for like all of his like sexual stimulation. It ended up growing too brittle, and so he had to pulverize and discard it so that he couldn't, it was too brittle. He was nervous it was going to break, so he just pulverized it, discarded it. And this really kickstarted his infatuation with murder. He ended up killing about 15 more young men and boys over the course of a couple years. So one thing to keep in mind is that when I say that he killed like 15 more people, in total, he killed about 17 people, right? I think he was only convicted for like 14 of them. On this podcast, I don't really talk about the court cases too much unless there was something interesting about it, because for the most part, like, I'm not super interested in the legal aspect of a serial killer and what they got sentenced for. As long as they're put behind bars, that's pretty much what matters to me. But one thing that's really interesting to note is that he did not kill like that many people. And I know that you're like, what? He killed so many people. Like, yeah, he killed, like a dozen and more, a dozen plus people. But compared to a lot of like really prolific serial killers, he really did not kill that many people. I talked about this too on the episode with Ed Gein. You can go back a couple episodes and listen to that one too, if you like this sort of topic. But Ed Gein also only killed like 2 people, and then Dahmer only killed like 17. Like, that's not as much as people like Bundy and Gacy that killed upwards of like 40 people. Like, that is so many people to have murdered, and he didn't kill that many, but it's what he did that made him stick in the minds of so many people for so long, if that makes sense. So, moving on. Sorry for that rant. In September of 1988, his grandmother ended up kicking him out of the house because she was nervous that he kept bringing all these young men over late at night. She never saw them leave. And there were also all these really gross, she described them as foul smells that were coming from the basement and the garage. He ended up finding a 1-bedroom, and he moved in on September 25th. I believe he then got like evicted from that one from not paying rent and had to move into another place, which is like where he ended up staying. It was another 1-bedroom, like basically on the same street. Anyway, This is when he began to keep parts of the bodies of people that he killed. So he would keep like bones, including like the really long bones, like the femur, the spine, the skull. He would mummify parts of the heads, and he would keep some of their genitalia as well. He would take Polaroid photos of the dead bodies in suggestive positions, like in very sexual positions, before he would then take pictures of step by step his dismemberment process, so that he could use it later for stimulation. He also began to keep parts of the flesh to consume later, including like bicep muscles, thigh muscles, glute muscles, as well as the heart. He was really infatuated with people's hearts, is something that you'll like hear a little bit about later. It's like part of how he gets caught. But he has this weird obsession with people's hearts. He likes listening to the heartbeat. This is when he tried to so killing was not, if this makes any sense, killing was sort of like the way to achieve the still body that he wanted. But killing was not what necessarily did the stimulation. Does that make sense? It was everything that happened after they were still and cold. It wasn't the actual act of killing that gave him the jolt. So what he ended up trying to do at one point was drill holes in the heads of some of his victims and pour in hydrochloric acid to induce like a permanent, submissive, unresistant, zombie-like vegetable state so that he could continually rape the body without it decaying at all. This obviously didn't work, but neighbors kept complaining of a smell coming from his apartment, as well as sounds of chainsaws and things like that. He would always find some excuse for them with the landlord, like one of which was that like all of his tropical fish had died and he just has to clean out the tank. Like, what? Who believes that? That can't be true. Like, that's so weird. I don't know any landlord that would be like, when like, I didn't see you bring any fish in. Like, how the fuck did you get fish? Like, that's what my landlord in New York would be like. I'd be like, oh, sorry, I have fish that died. He'd be like, when the fuck did you get fish? Like, that's not on your lease. You can't have fish. Like, I don't know. I just think that's really weird. But also, it's like Midwest, so it's different than being in like a big city. But still, I think it's bizarre. On one occasion, he ended up drilling a hole into the frontal lobe of a young 14-year-old boy. His name was, I'm so sorry for butchering this, Conorak synthasimphone. Conorak synthasimphone. Wow. Whom had agreed to come to his apartment to pose nude for money. This was a really common way of Dahmer getting people up to his apartment, was either with the promise of drinking, of prostitution, like sex for money, or like if you pose nude for me or pose like semi-nude for me, I'll pay you some money, I'll take pictures, whatever. Dahmer led Conorak into his bedroom, and there was a body of somebody down on the floor. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And Conorak had no reaction. Didn't even react to it. So he laid down with him in the bed for a little bit and then went to a nearby bar to take a drink. He came back in the early morning, and he returned to the apartment to see that Conorak was sitting on the curb, speaking to 3 women who had phoned 911, and he wasn't speaking English. He was speaking a different language. He explained to the women, he tried to explain that like he was his boyfriend and blah blah blah. They got in a fight and the women were like, we already called 911, like shut the fuck up. And then when the 2 officers showed up, they were both male. This is important. He explained that this was his 19-year-old boyfriend who ended up drinking way too much after a fight, and this is what happens when he gets drunk. He speaks in this language and he gets mad and blah blah blah. The women were trying to explain to the officers that like his butt was bleeding and he had like a bloody head and like there was just something off about the whole situation. Like he was clearly not wanting to go with Dahmer. And the officers told her to, quote, butt out and shut the hell up, unquote, because this was a domestic issue and it did not involve a woman. Wow. So gross. I hate everything about that statement. Like, it's so bad. So they ended up escorting him up to the apartment just to make sure that everything was okay. And in an attempt to prove that they were truly lovers and this wasn't anything weird, he showed them the semi-nude photos that he had taken of the boy prior to him becoming basically a vegetable. Um, so the officers were like, yeah, cool, like, you're totally dating. Mind if we peek around the bedroom? And he was like, yeah, sure. The officer looked in the bedroom where there was a body, a bloated carcass of 31-year-old Tony Hughes that was on the bedroom floor, and he didn't see it and just left the apartment. If that is not a lucky streak for someone like Dahmer, I don't know what the fuck is. That is like, holy crap. The universe was like, keep going. You're doing great work. Jesus. Anyway, he would eventually be stopped after inviting 32-year-old Tracy Edwards up to his apartment. Edwards then spent the next 5 hours being handcuffed, stripped down. At one point, Dahmer like put his head onto his chest and said that he was going to kill him, cut his heart out, and eat it. He was brandishing a huge knife. He was threatening him. They started drinking. And Edwards was a very intelligent man. And so he started to work his way towards, he knew that the front door wasn't locked, and he knew that there were windows he could climb out of in the event that he had to. He just had to wait for the opportunity of Dahmer to be distracted. So he was like, can we please go out in the living room where there's air conditioning? It's hot. Sure, whatever. So they go out into the living room. Edwards is like, can I use the bathroom? Sure. He goes and gets up, uses the bathroom, comes back. A couple minutes later, after drinking some more, he's like, can I please go use the bathroom? And the minute Dahmer is like, wait a minute, but he punches him in the face, runs out of the door. You know, he only had one hand handcuffed, and Dahmer was kind of holding onto the handcuff to make sure he couldn't go anywhere. The minute he sort of let go for a second, Edwards punched him so hard in the face, ran out the front door, and flagged down 2 officers nearby. He told them everything that had happened, and they decided that they needed to go back to the apartment and, arrest this man immediately. When they went into the apartment, they asked, like, did you handcuff this man? And Dahmer was like, yeah, I did, but he didn't really give any explanation of, like, why he had done that or what the context was. So they decided to search the apartment. One of the officers sort of held him back, and they found a huge barrel that had, like, some acid in it, and it smelled terrible. They saw like some stuff in the freezer, and then they eventually found the Polaroid photos that were in his bedside drawer, with photos of the dismemberment process. The minute that they found these pictures, one of the officers said, quote, "This shit is real," unquote. Dahmer tried to resist arrest. The officer tackled him to the ground, and then he looked over at the officers and stated, quote, "For what I did, I should be dead," unquote. From this point forward, Dahmer he's really not resisting arrest pretty much at all. Like, he explains everything. He doesn't have a lawyer. He admits to guilt in trial, like, pretty much immediately. In prison, apparently. There are accounts of him being very unremorseful, but then there are way more accounts of him being, like, very, like, sorry and solemn and knowing that what he did was wrong, and we'll get into that in a second. In a lot of interviews, Dahmer, like, he waived the right to have a lawyer present, and he described all of the murders and the entire dismemberment process in detail, and just gave it all up immediately. He talked about how he wanted to build an altar that was dedicated to himself. He called it his place of worship. It was going to be sort of a place that he could sit and meditate in his apartment with all the dead bodies. So he wanted to have 2 full spines, 5 skulls, incense sticks, and a blue lantern. He was going to put a black shower curtain over the window, and a black leather chair would be sat in front of the altar. He stated that this would be his place of meditation, and if they found him in 6 months, that's exactly what they would have found in his apartment. At least he's honest. The chief medical examiner on the case said that, quote, "It was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene," unquote. because everything was so meticulously placed, and he had such a specific way of putting all of these body parts all around the apartment. Um, it was a very bizarre scene to sort of dismantle. Dahmer was obviously charged for his crimes. He admitted to guilt right away. And in interviews, they found him like schizophrenic, possible multiple personality disorder. I'm so sorry. They found a lot of other things wrong with him, but they did not find that he had no idea that what he did was wrong. So for those of you that don't know, in a lot of cases, they'll say like he's mentally unstable, he can't understand that what he did was wrong, therefore he pleads insanity, and then they go to like a mental institution. But obviously Dahmer knew that what he did was incorrect. Like there was no way that they could say he didn't know that what he did was wrong. He had admitted to it, he's guilty, whatever. So they sent him to prison. He later got killed in prison by a bludgeoning to the head with a 20-inch metal bar. He died on November 28th, 1994. Christopher Scarver and Jesse Anderson were left with him in the prison gym showers for about 20 minutes, and there's a bunch of different stories about how it all happened, but the bottom line is that Scarver bludgeoned Anderson and Dahmer to death on the same day in the same place. That's the bottom line. Dahmer has become somewhat of a pop culture icon. That is so dark to say, because he is a terrible, terrible person. But he's become very popular. People really like his story. They like what he did. They think it's fascinating. I mean, I'm talking about him now on a podcast, like it's very fascinating what he did. There are countless films, books, TV shows, plays. For those of you that are musical theater people, shout out to all of you. In Book of Mormon, they have a big reference to him in the spooky Mormon Hell Dream. They literally say, I killed a guy and fucked his corpse. Like, it's like, he's a very popular icon as far as dark, grotesque topics go. There are a lot of people that sort of use him as an example of what they want their characters to be when they're writing screenplays or stories, things like that. Same with Ed Gein. He's become a really big icon. It's interesting when you see serial killers like this, where it's not necessarily that their story gets told all the time, but people are so fascinated by what they did that they take what they did and morph it into something new. So you'll see a lot of cases of Dahmer in pop culture where, like, especially now that you as a listener now know what he did. I didn't go into too much detail with every single murder. If you'd like to look that up yourself, you totally can. I did read it all. I didn't think it was super necessary for the purposes of the podcast. But he was very meticulous with each body, and he was very meticulous with each person. And you'll see a lot of cases of that with shows like American Horror Story and things like that. You'll see he's kind of referenced in what one of the characters is doing, but he himself will not be referenced. Whereas killers like Bundy are constantly referenced for what they did and how they did things, and they themselves are the reference. There are so many movies about him, documentaries about him. The Bundy tapes came out. That movie with Zac Efron in it, which is fantastic. I would recommend watching the tapes first and then the film, because his performance in it is so spot on to what Ted Bundy actually was and what he did. Anyway, that's for another episode. If you'd like to see an episode on Bundy, let me know. I'm really interested in doing that too, so we can talk about that later. But it's interesting to note that some killers, this sounds bad, I'm really sorry, but like, they get credit for what they did versus like taking inspiration from, if that makes sense. It's almost like Bundy has like a copyright and they have to be like, yeah, this is like Bundy or blah blah blah. Whereas like when it's reference to like Gein and Dahmer, it's like they're just their own person doing like necrophiliac things, and that's totally acceptable. It's interesting to note. I don't know. It's weird. It's interesting to me to think about. But that's pretty much all the information that I have. Again, for the purposes of my podcast, I don't go into too much detail about the court case and how everything went down. Especially with Dahmer, he admitted to it right away, had a confession, was like, yeah, I did it. Like, the court case itself was not very interesting. With some killers, the court case is a lot of how they became famous, is what happened in court. In those cases, I'll definitely talk about it a little bit more, but for the purposes of um, the sort of dark aspects of my podcast, I don't choose to talk about it. If that's something that you think you'd be interested in hearing about in an episode, maybe what I can do is do an episode about court cases with murderers or something like that, and talk about how all of that is done. If you'd like to hear that, let me know. If you guys have any ideas for any future episodes, or any ideas just in general for what I can do with the podcast in the future, please let me know. You can send me a direct message on Instagram. The Instagram is at Whispers From Below. No spaces, no underscores, no capitals, no nothing. And the email is the same if you prefer to email me. That is whispersfrombelow@gmail.com. No spaces, no underscores, no capitals, no nothing. Like I said earlier, please keep an eye out for episodes coming out on Monday and Thursday at 8 a.m. 2 episodes a week now, up until quarantine is done. I figure this is the time to pump out as much content as possible. So get ready for season 2. It's coming. We've got a couple mini series that I wanted to start. And so I'm going to start doing those again, because now I'm in a new season, such as like the Grimm's fairy tale stuff and things like that. And if there's one thing that I can ask you guys to do, it's please to share this podcast with someone that you know. If you'd like to share it on social media, I would appreciate it so very, very much. It would be so sweet of you to do that. If you don't feel comfortable sharing it on social media, just tell one person. If I can get all of my viewers to tell one person about it, and that person decides to listen to it, that doubles my listenership, my viewership. And that really does a lot for me. I really want to keep this podcast going. I want to make it into something big. I love doing this for you guys. I absolutely love doing it. I missed doing it the past 2 weeks. But it was good to take a step back and sort of view what episodes were doing well, what wasn't doing well, what people liked, what people wanted. Some people reached out, said what they liked, what they didn't like, things like that. I appreciate the critique, the criticism, whatever you guys have for me is wonderful. But please, please, please share this podcast. The bigger it gets, the more stuff I can do for you guys. And the more fun we can have as a sort of little psychopathic group. I think that's definitely important, to find your tribe. So, remember, Dahmer likes dead people. Bundy might have a copyright. And wash your hands and stay safe, please. It's still dangerous out there.